In this tutorial, we'll be creating some in-between frames for an animation. We're going to follow a couple of principles of animation today. We're going to continue talking about timing, and we're also going to do a pose-to-pose animation. What that means is sometimes we need to figure out how long it's going to take for something to happen, and a keyframe animator, which is usually your top-tier animator, would figure out the key poses in some kind of movement sequence. So as an example here that I'm showing you now, like the space between this neutral standing pose and preparing to jump, there might be several frames in between there. The keyframe animator would just draw these main keyframes, and then those keyframes would be given to an in-between animator who would fill in all of the other frames that go between here and here. This way we can say, well, if we want a full second between standing and anticipation, that tells us exactly how many frames we would need to fill in between those, and that's an easier way to figure out timing. And what we're going to create today is we're going to create a square that jumps in the air and then runs across the screen. And we're going to practice those timing charts a little bit more. Hopefully those are making sense. And if not, then we can continue to talk about those right now. So the first thing you'll need to do is to go to my shared folder and open up this running square Flash document in here, and this is all set up and ready to go. In here I've created some keyframes, and they're not always just in the same location. I'm animating on 2s here, so we're only doing every other frame. So frame 1 to frame 5 is the square beginning to jump. So this is an anticipation. It's exaggerating how someone would prepare to jump. And then from 5 to 15, it's in the air. That's 12 frames, so that's exactly half a second to get in the air, and then another half a second to reach the ground. So I did this to figure out my timings, because I don't know if I just drew it frame by frame, I probably wouldn't get to a full second in that jump, but I really wanted it to take a second to get from one end of the jump to the other. Then this last part, it rears back, runs across, slides a little bit, and then ends. And so you're going to fill in every other frame, animating on 2s, to make this animation much smoother. You'll be doing in-between animation. So let's go to frame 5 here, and you'll see that I've drawn a timing chart here. What I did was I figured I want a half a second between when it starts to jump and when it is halfway in the air. And then I figured that's from 5 to 15. How many frames are between there? 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. That's 6 frames altogether, including 5 and 15. Which means I need to figure out where this guy is going to be between here and there. So I'm going to turn on my onion skin, drag those out. I need to get between these two locations. Now the easiest way to do that is to draw halfway. But if I just go to halfway on my frames and I draw halfway, it's going to be a very consistent speed all the way up. I want it to be faster when it's starting to jump and then slow down as it starts to reach the top of this arc. And so that's why I introduced this timing chart. And we'll do this from scratch with the next one. As you can see here, we start on frame 5. I cut it in half, in half, in half, in half again until I had 6 total frames. And then I went back and I numbered them. So frame 5 is here. This tells me that halfway between 5 and 15 would be frame 7. Now that seems really weird, but let's just do that. Let's go to frame 7. I just click on it down here on my timeline, and I press F7 to create a new keyframe there. And I want to drag my onion skin so I only see the middle, frame 5 and frame 15, the 2 frames. My timing chart told me that frame 7 should be right in the middle, and the easiest way to draw something is to draw between 2 states, exactly in the middle. So what's the middle between here and here? It's somewhere in this area. So what I'm going to do is draw this square kind of in the middle between those 2 states. Even though I'm much earlier in the timeline, that's going to give me that slowing in at the end when I start to slow down that I'm looking for in this arc. So then I go back and look at my timing chart again. My next half is 9. So if I go to frame 9, create a keyframe there by pressing F7. Now I may have to move my onion skin a little bit so I can only see those 2 frames. What's the halfway point between this previous frame and this next frame? This is what in-between animators do. And it's much easier to do this if I just think of things as half and half. Halfway between 2 frames is much easier to draw than trying to guess. And another part of this that's kind of difficult that I want to try to do is to maintain the consistency of the volume of the shape. I don't want it to get too long or too short or too big or too small. It's going to bend and stretch a little bit, but I want it to still look like itself as it goes through this motion. Back to my timing chart. 11 is the next halfway, as you can see right here. 11 is halfway between 9 and 15. So I'm going to go to frame 11 now, hit F7, and draw halfway between those two. And as I get closer to the top, you're going to notice that the two frames that you're drawing halfway between are going to become much closer together. That is because this is working. Frames that are closer together are going more slowly. This is going to be much slower as it reaches the top of the arc. And then my last one is frame 13. And if I ever see more than 2 frames with my onion skin, I can just drag these brackets and change them again. So my last halfway is going to be something like this. These two are very close to each other. Now I'll turn off onion skin, turn on my loop, and see that sequence that I just drew. It's going to happen very fast. It all happens in about half a second, but what we should see is it slows down quite a bit as it reaches the top. That's why I do the timing charts, is because it makes a much better animation if I have it gradually pick up speed or if I have it gradually slow down. Now on the way back down, we want to do the same thing. I'm going to turn on onion skin again. From frame 15, which is right there, to frame 25 is this gap. So this is the beginning of my next half a second. This is the end of my next half a second. 15 and 25. Now I want it to be slow at the beginning and begin to pick up speed, which means that my timing chart's a little different. If I cut this in half to get 3 frames, this is the half that's going to be slower. And I make things slower by adding more frames. So I'm going to cut it in half again. That gives me 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That gives me 5. And that gives me 6. That's how many frames I need. Now, it can help out a lot. I'm going to make my brush smaller. It helps me out a lot if I number these two. So that'd be 17, 19, frame 21, frame 23. This tells me that frame 23 is the halfway point. If I move forward to frame 23, that's going to seem a little weird. And I hit F7 to create a new keyframe. I'll move my onion skin back so I can see just the 2 frames. Even though I'm close to the end of this half a second, my timing chart is telling me that halfway between 15 to 25 is what I want to draw, and I'm going to trust it. So halfway between these 2 states, oops, make my brush a little bigger. You know what? I'm going to try that again. And this time what you'll find is you're going kind of backwards from before. Because previously it was at the end it was slowing down, now it's at the beginning. So once again, back to my timing chart. What's halfway between 23 and 15? It's 21. I'll go back to frame 21, hit F7. What's halfway between those 2 frames? Something like this. And I'm putting in quite a bit of a bend on this. I'm trying to work fast too. If I go back again, halfway between those 2, hit F7 and draw the halfway point. Back one more time. And that one I'm probably going to have some problems with because it's a little short. So I'm just going to, I don't want it to get too narrow as I'm going down. And then F7 again on frame 17 and draw one last half. And this one's going to be a little tough because I didn't give myself a lot of room. Now, that seems like a lot of work to get to basically from one end to the other. But what that should do, if I've done everything right, I'll turn off my onion skin, turn on the loop, and watch it, is you should see a noticeable slowdown when we reach the top and a speed up at the end. And that's crucial when you're doing these kinds of arcs to make something look more realistic. And I have a little issue here where it gets a little too short, so I could always go back and fix that later. But that's my animation for that part. So then I'm going to do the same thing here at the end. Now you could just try to, if you don't want to do the timing chart, you could always just try to wing this, but from frame 29 to frame 41, it's running across the screen. And I would like it to pick up speed as it's going, because when things run, we don't just automatically go to full speed, we pick up speed. So I'm going to do another chart. And you can follow mine or just kind of eyeball it, but I think you'll get better results if you get more comfortable with these timing charts. So I'm going to go from frame 29 to frame 41. How many frames is that? I'm going to count on my fingers here. You can't see that. 29, 31, 33, 35, 37, 39, 41. So that's 7 frames altogether. Let me double check that. Yeah, I feel good about that. So that's 7 frames between when it starts to run and when it stops running at frame 41. So now I got to fill in those 7 frames on my chart. First I'm going to cut it in half. That's 3 frames. Now I want it to be slower at the beginning, so I'm going to cut this bottom part in half. 4 frames, 5 frames, 6 frames. And you know what, in this case, I could always just do another half here, but I'm going to do a favor here, and that is just where we kind of emphasize this last one by putting one right before it. And you could do it either way. You could put it down here or right up here. So frame 29, 31, 33, 35, 37, 39, and 41. Now I just find the halves. Halfway, frame 37. So I click on frame 37 down here, hit F7. Oh, got to turn on my onion skin. What's halfway between those two? It's much easier to draw halfway than it would be to draw 3/4 of the way, or even a weirder fraction. So I'm thinking halfway is probably like that. And if you get this timing down, it's going to make your life a lot easier. It's a lot of figuring things out beforehand, but if it clicks for you, that will save you a lot of trouble. Halfway again is 35, so I'm going to go up here to 35, hit F7, and draw halfway again. And I'm leaning it forward so it looks like it's really moving ahead. My next halfway is 33. Oops, I'm on 32. That's not right. 33, and then hit F7. And I'll have to slide my onion skin back a little bit. So halfway there again. Maybe this one, he's starting to, maybe at this one, it's just straight up and down. And then on 31, this is where it starts to straighten up for the first time from the previous frame. So I'm just trying to find the halfway point between this, and this is the most effective way to do in-betweens I've found. And then I have one last one on my timing chart. I did that favor at the end, so on frame 39, right before the end, I just want to really emphasize that it's about to stop. So I'm going to put one just right before the end here. When I watch that, hopefully what it looks like is, let's watch it all the way here. So it jumps, and then it starts to pick up speed. And then I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to have it slow down from, and I only have a few frames here, so not a lot to work with. From 41 to 45, I mean, geez, if you're doing that timing chart, there's not a lot to it. It'd be like 45, 41, you have 1. So I'd probably just put it, if I want it to slow down at the end, I'd probably put it like right there at a third. Or you can do whatever you want with that. So just go in and fill in every other frame. We're animating on 2s. And you're going to try to fill in every other frame for the rest of this. If you want something to be still for a while, so maybe at the beginning here, or at, let's say at frame 25, you want it just to stop before it leans back, then you can just let that frame go for a little bit more than every other frame. You don't have to necessarily do every other frame if you want something to be still. And then once you've got that, there's two more things that I'd like you to do. If you can, if you've closed off your box every time, you should be able to click on each of these frames and use the paint bucket to fill it in with the color. And you have to unfortunately do this every single frame, but it's not too hard with the paint bucket tool. And then I'd like you to make another layer. Call this one background by double clicking on it and drag it to the bottom. And I'm going to lock the layer I'm not currently working on so only background is available. Now notice that the background layer, as soon as you bring in a new layer, it's automatically the same size as the rest of your animation. Now I can draw in a background, and this is a separate piece. I don't have to redraw the background every time. If I draw this just once, then as long as that frame continues on its layer, then I can just reuse the same background. So you can bring in backgrounds from other programs like Photoshop or Illustrator, or you can draw it right in here. And I'm going to back out a little bit. I can use my brush to put in ground, and if anything out in the gray area isn't going to show up. If I want to, I can't just paint bucket here though, because this white edge doesn't actually exist. But if I came in here, maybe I'll get a dark blue, and I'll just brush around the edge. Now I can fill it in. Now I can use the paint bucket and fill it in. And I want you to create a background. Maybe you could have something that it jumps over here. You can draw additional things in the back, use the different brushes and the brush sizes to add a background as well. And when you're done, I want you to make sure that you've saved this in your drive as, we're going to keep it called running square, but put the class period, last name, first initial at the beginning of it. And then you can save that in your drive. And then I want you to press Control and Enter to send me a SWF file. That creates a SWF with the same name in the same location, and then you can send that to me. And I still have my charts showing up. I could go back and erase those, but that's not a big deal. And then you have this SWF file that you can submit to me.